can obviously see parallels between Locke and the Declaration's ideals, not only in the plagiarized phrase itself. Okay, just a reminder that Locke included in his inalienable rights life, liberty, and property, and the Declaration of Independence plagiarized his, with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, we can obviously see parallels between Locke and the Declaration's ideals, not only in the plagiarized phrase itself, but in the explicit expression of an understanding of natural rights. And an understanding of natural rights only makes sense when it is coupled with an understanding of natural law. The term natural law shows up quite a bit in these older documents, and I love using it. But again, this is a primer on things you probably thought you already knew. The phrase self-evident reflects an understanding of natural law. We will come back to this idea in more depth later, but natural law, according to Locke, can be discerned by all rational people, no matter where they were born, where they grew up, or what language they speak. And this discernible natural law is what actually lays the foundation for innate natural rights. That also means every human being, regardless of their situation, is endowed with natural rights just by their existence. And if a government passes laws or behaves in a way that infringes upon those natural rights, the government's actions are evil because they are against nature. This is in direct opposition to the idea of democracy, where if the government acts in a certain way, that is by definition the moral and good way. Thus, the American experiment was founded on the fundamental belief that there is an inherent right and wrong. There are moral absolutes. Right and wrong is not determined by who is in the majority. Nature determines morality, and nature draws a line between good and evil, right and wrong, not the government. In other words, not the sovereign. Under this idea of natural law, immutable and true, government can act immorally. Government's actions are not always right and all that ever should be, simply because government exists. And this is why I will die on the hill that democracy is not what we want. It is in direct opposition. Anyway, we'll come back to that later. Locke also argues that people inherently know what is right and wrong and are capable of knowing what is lawful and unlawful well enough without it being written down in order to resolve conflicts. If one person calls something good while another person calls the same thing evil, the deed the two individuals are referring to still has real qualities of good or evil. These categories exist in the world regardless of our names for them. So one person could be right and one person could be wrong, even though they are still talking about the same thing. Just because someone says something is good does not make it so. Just because someone says it is evil does not make it so. Just because someone says something is true does not make it so. Just because someone says it's false does not make it so. There are real qualities of good and evil. These categories exist in the world regardless of our names for them. Thus, if one man's word does not correspond to another man's word, this is a problem of communication or understanding. This is according to Locke, not an indication of moral relativism. What is right and good for me might be bad and wrong for you. We will see later how important language is to meaning and how some people will intentionally confuse this communication, confuse other people by manipulating language to kind of subvert the shared meaning and understanding of this natural law we're talking about. This is how evil can become good and good can become evil. Even though it's not so, just because they switched places in language. But there are things that most people don't need to have written down to know, like it is inherently wrong to betray your family and friends. It is inherently right to lovingly care for your children. The murder or even accidental death of an innocent person is never right. Genocide is wrong. Defending those you love is right. Rape and torture are wrong. Eating is good and starving is bad. Justice is good. Injustice is bad. Liberty is good. Tyranny is bad. Again, we'll have more examples later, but hopefully you get it. Locke also believed that people are also able to tell the difference between what is theirs and what belongs to someone else. A child understands this before she even knows how to speak. One of the first words a child learns, in fact, is mine. We know when someone has trespassed against us or against our property. If your house has ever been broken into and items stolen or destroyed, you know the violation you feel. When someone takes what you know is yours, the loss causes physical pain for some people, even if it is something as insignificant as a stolen French fry off their plate. When we watch videos of or were present during an armed robbery, our spirit lurches against the action. We not only know what is ours, but what belongs to someone else. Even though these things are inherently known, however, Locke understood that people do not always act in accordance with this knowledge. People trespass, steal, destroy, and kill one another. And this is why governments must be instituted among men to secure and protect natural law and natural rights from those who would seek to deny the self-evident law of nature and infringe upon the God-given rights of others by committing evil against their fellow man. And if you understand how personal thought and opinions and one's own conscience are also fundamental property of each individual and rights and innate rights, you probably now understand the importance of being able to agree to disagree. People are entitled to their own thoughts, even if they don't align with the majority or with the media or with your thoughts. These opinions are property that should also be protected, not dictated. Governments are necessary for man's liberty, not because governments give rights or bestow liberty upon their peoples, but because some people are not good and seek to take life, take liberty, take property, and prevent others from pursuing their own happiness. And the government is supposed to protect the good people's rights from being taken away by the bad people. Governments are instituted among men to recognize and uphold natural law. And I think this is why the freedom of speech is so revered, but this is also why the freedom of speech and freedom of religion should be protected by the government. Censorship of opinions and expressed thought violates natural law. Freedom of conscience and personal belief is also property and pursuit of happiness that are innate rights of every single individual. It is immoral for the government to want to take these away from its citizens. It is immoral for the government to decide what you should believe, say, and do, even if most people agree with them and think you are stupid and you are immoral for believing something different from them. And again, this is the opposite of democracy. The opposite. of democracy. Heading: Locke's philosophy. In Locke's social contract, relying on natural law and natural rights, the people agree to be governed, to accept partial justice and imperfect security from the misunderstandings of their fellow man. And in return, the government serves to protect the natural rights of the people. This entire concept is wrapped up nicely in how the previously quoted sentence from the preamble to the Declaration of Independence fits with the sentences that follows. Quote, "We find these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." End quote. The government has only the power given to it by those it governs. And if the government fails to protect our natural rights based on natural law, the people are obligated to replace the government. Now, we tend to think we do this through elections, but how is that going for us? Locke actually believed in mini revolutions every so often, probably because he understood that any amount of power corrupts, and the more power a government amasses over time, the more corrupt it becomes. I think we're going to end there for now, but what does this mean for the corrupt system Americans have allowed to stay in place for so long? The corruption started a long time ago, at the beginning, right? But something that starts to rot starts rotting faster over time. The corruption of the system, of the men or people who have learned how to use the system, is definitely part of the unraveling of the fabric of this country. I think most Americans want to point out or blame the corruption of the other team instead of noting that corruption is part of the system. Not the system as it was designed, but the system has been corrupted by corrupt human beings. This was a government fit for a moral people, including moral people in government. It was unfit for any other. So as our politicians seek to use the corruption in the system, they themselves become more corrupt as well. And it is a cycle of corruption that feeds itself. Maybe we don't need a revolution per se, but maybe we instead need a restoration to bring the role of government back to the place it was designed and intended to be. But such restoration cannot occur until Americans realize the need for it and can openly discuss how we can make it happen. Do you have any ideas?